okay, because I think the question is great. The questions are great. Let's put a little, let's get some key takeaways that are pretty much policy driven and also invite questions both about portability and auto portability. So first of all, I wanted to give you a sort of magnitude of the issue slide. Okay, and what this slide is saying is on an annual basis, so right, every year, how many people are changing jobs and what is their account balance at the time that they're changing jobs, and what is the behavior that we're seeing, or the bad behaviors that we're seeing. What's the concentration, density, or percentage of bad behaviors that we're seeing at that time of job change, okay? And so I'll just go off to the far right-hand column, and you'll see these numbers are first retirement clearinghouse numbers. Okay, we've pulled together research. Most of it's based on EBRI research, but a lot of it we've collected from industry sources as well. When they publish their research findings and things like that, we sort of suck it all in and condense it and find the stuff that we're interested in terms of portability. And so just to give you an order of magnitude, how many people with a 401k change jobs every year? Best guess. If we're off by 1 million, no worries. The order of magnitude didn't change. So that's 14.8 million people. Okay, so you all know who Fidelity Investments is, right? I'll bet you do. Good. You know how many 401k participants they have? Active? About 15 million. Okay? That says that every customer of Fidelity's changed jobs and left those plans every year. Okay? So people say, so what's the big deal about portability? It's been codified into ERISA since, well, Dallas, since when? You know, 1974? Right, 1974. I learned all this from Dallas, just like the senator suggested, okay? Yeah. But the reality of our world is that there are not mechanisms for that to happen, and that's what we're going to talk about next. But real quickly, what are the bad behaviors, the destructive behaviors that are happening? Well, the easiest one to see is the cash out. So we've quantified that for you, okay? And I'll go to the bottom right-hand corner now and say, basically, we've got, you know, roughly a third, a little more than the third of the population cashing out when they change jobs, okay? So then you have to go further. And so, Neil, I'll ask you to advance the slide, okay? So I hope I've made a reasonable case that portability is critical to the mobile workforce. We've got 15 million people changing jobs, and almost 5 of them are cashing out every year, okay? Portability is, I don't cash out, my money moves with me wherever it's going, okay? New employer plan, IRA, you know, I'm not here to start a Hatfields and McCoy's war. I'm here to talk about how to keep it in the system, okay? The research findings that were done by Boston Research Technologies, and we can supply this to you if you want, pinpoint why people are cashing out. So Warren Cormier, the president over there, surveyed 5,000 participants in plans, okay, and asked a very deep series of questions. And the finding is that about 37% of the people cashed out because they really needed the money, okay? So the gentleman asked, is this a mandate question? And the answer is, I don't believe in mandates. We have a voluntary system. The system works better if it's voluntary. I couldn't see perfect portability the way we modeled it first, so we could see the high water mark. But 63% of the people took the money for another reason. It wasn't a family emergency or a rent situation or whatever you want to call it, okay? So theoretically, we could keep 60-odd% of the cash outs from happening, okay? Let's dig one deeper. So why are they cashing out? Well, as it turns out, you know, there's one other big finding, and that is moving my money is the most difficult thing to do, okay? And we researched this. You all know it, actually, okay? Many of you have experienced it. But when you ask the question in terms of how many hours do you think you have to spend to do this, right? We asked 5,000 people, so this is valid. Or how much, you know, how long it's going to take in terms of elapsed time, you'd be shocked at the answers. And how do people value that time? I mean, we had people who valued that time at $5,000 to move their money. This was not I'm going to take $5,000 home. It's I would pay $5,000 for somebody to move my money for me because I think it's going to take me, 200 hours or whatever the number was. All right? So the research says that if you fix that problem, the difficulty of moving my money, you will begin the process of reducing leakage. Okay? So, how do we, and what are the benefits of portability? Well, we've seen a bunch of them, right? But I'm trying to, put words in your mouth, in your head. So you say, what does this get me? What does portability get me? What does it get me? Well, it gets you reduced leakage, which gets you all of the savings preserved. Okay? And then there's a second phenomenon, which is the behavioral side of this thing, which is fascinating. Other firms like Northern Trust and others have done research on this, which I've seen in my children, okay? And you'll all recognize it, which is when my account gets to a certain value, I start to treat it very differently. So if it's really small, it's chump change, okay? When it gets to, some say 10,000, I think the number is closer to 15, I begin to think of my account as an asset. I don't think of it as, well, it just happened because I was enrolled in a plan and some contribution and matching things happened. I begin to think of it as an asset, and I actually begin to think about retirement as long-term savings. So we need to change the behavior is the second step of this process. We need to first create an efficient, effective means by which people can have their money moved for them. They don't want to do it themselves. Okay? It's that simple. And then secondly, in doing that, we begin to change folks' behavior. So you could anticipate over time, you could actually create, behavioral changes. And that's actually what underlies, this is our fourth bullet point, what underlies auto portability. Okay? So think about auto enrollment. We'll draw the parallels there. We all see what happens with auto enrollment in a plan. Okay? With and without. We see differences in participation that sometimes are as high as 40 or 50% increases in participation through auto enrollment. All right, we see a much higher level of engagement. We see much better choices for our investments. We see all of those things. Okay, auto portability carries the same behavioral traits, which is if you make this easy for me and I can just tell you to do it, then I'm more likely to do what you want me to do. Okay? So when someone says what's the magic in portability and more precisely in auto portability, I actually have to answer kind of two parts. Easy, right? So we create an electronic highway. This is not new news. I could get dramatic and ask everybody to take their phone out and show me their favorite app, okay? But the reality is we're all we're accustomed to these types of things now. And we're going to embed that. The idea is that we embed that same simplicity, access, feature, into my plan, right? It becomes a default, essentially. It doesn't become a default by a mandate. It becomes a default because people are given a better choice, all right? And then they choose to start doing the right thing. So it'll take time to change that behavior, but that's what it's all about. There's some ancillary benefits to auto portability. I'd be remiss. I call it laying the groundwork. We think of auto portability as helping the small accounts, and I love what the senator said at the beginning. You make small changes in a system this big, and it really starts to show up. Well, the same thing is true of auto portability. You start, the average account for a participant with less than $5,000 is $1,679. All right? This is my kids, your kids, or you. Maybe it's you, right? You take $1,679 times 5 million people a year, and you wonder where the cash out, why the cash out numbers or leakage numbers are so high. Now let's flip that around. You retain it, you grow it over time, and that's where the big numbers come from. Okay? That's actually the magic. The magic is simply changing that behavior, to preservation and then letting it, letting the system grow itself over time. Okay? We see very high levels of satisfaction, life satisfaction, with people who have enough money saved for retirement, right? Let's help them get there. Okay? But the groundwork is actually important because, to Lou's question, which is a great question, people ask me what a clearinghouse is, and the word I'd ask you to remember is it's a utility. Okay? It's not designed to hold money. It will do that if necessary to enable the process. It's not designed to interface directly with the employers or the participants. It's not an educational vehicle. It's a transaction utility. All right? Once you put a network in place that connects all the plans, and they're going to get connected by connecting to record keepers. Okay, so Fidelity, Vanguard, Aon Hewitt, although we don't know what they're going to call themselves, but Empower, all the players. The utility's job is just to enable the connections between them. Once you get that piping in place or that network in place, it can be used for many other things. I would imagine there are people who would, like to work on large account balances and have great ideas for that. You can transmit electronic packets of information over a network and move accounts. Okay, this isn't new news. You can take part of those packets. I think Lou might have left. I was trying to call him out here, but auto escalation. So you think about when someone changes jobs. I'll just go one place with you, which is I did all this work to get my plan set up, my deferral, and when the match came, and my investment elections and my escalation and all that kind of stuff. Why do I have to do that all over again? And the answer is you don't. Okay. If your packet of information contains that information, or your packet contains that information, take it to your new employer plan. So think about some of the corollary or ancillary benefits of establishing a network that enables portability, and other players who might take advantage of that network, all with the same goal that, like the senator laid out, which is we increase our retirement savings. Private sector savings are good. That's like an Animal House line, isn't it? Knowledge is good. Private sector savings are good. Repeat after me. Okay? And then last but not least, Jack already pointed this out. I think access and coverage is one of the huge issues that we have. If we increase access and coverage and we have auto portability, all of those benefits from portability accrue to all of those new participants in the system. So I'll pause for a sec before I turn it over to Steve and questions. Yes, sir. Yeah. That's a great question. And I'll go give you a little of our history. When we first started thinking about this problem, we thought we would do what Carrie just suggested. That is you, Carrie, right? The eyes aren't so good. Which is we'll just transfer the account and all its holdings between employers. Doesn't work. So to Carrie's question, we can capture your investment profile and transmit that in a packet of information, but the cost and the complications from trying to transfer actual securities between plans is impossible, right? All plans don't have all investment elections. There'd have to be major, major changes to the system. What that means is you go to cash and then you get invested as quickly as possible, and speed is critical, okay? Now, speed is relative. Today, when we ask participants, many of them said it takes me 6 weeks to transfer my account. So if I talk about, 7 days or 3 days, or maybe this thing can get down to, sometime in the future, a 1 hour transaction, there's a really big difference between that and being in or out of the market for, 40 days, which is what the average is today. But it has to go to cash. It's impossible to map funds and do all that kind of stuff at a reasonable price point. It could be done technologically. It's not at a reasonable price point. So thank you for the question, Carrie. Yes. Well, what's going to happen is that cash is going to come to the front door of the new employer. All right, so it came to them in cash, and then that money will follow the investment elections that the employee has already made. Okay, and of course, if they haven't, then it's a QDIA process. That's how things are done today. You know, we've been doing rollovers and roll-ins for more than a decade now, and you know, that process doesn't have to be invented. It's already there. So if cash shows up and you've got the participant's identity, it follows investment elections they've already made or the default. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am. No. Yeah. Yeah. So the question, if you couldn't hear in the back of the room, was, you know, lifetime participation in plans includes annuity options and things like that that are very difficult to liquidate. You know, have we given that any thought in terms of the clearinghouse? And I don't want to punt the question, but what we said was we looked at the whole problem and said, what's the most important problem to solve first? And it's leakage and it's small accounts, right? And that's how we can draw in all the industry players. I think there's a role for that down the line. There's got to be a way to, actually, this is probably one of the few places blockchain technology would be helpful, and I won't go off on blockchain technology, but, you know, leave the asset where it is and record it over here in my new plan as opposed to trying to liquidate it is the simple way to think about it. Day 3, 4, or 5 is, you know, that's not going to happen right away. Let's solve the basic problem first. Let's get the accumulation happening the way it should by stopping leakage. Then we build from there.